Okay, great job, Christine. And our next presenter is Dennis Hahn. Dennis Hahn is a 10th grader from Ramsey High School, and mom, Helen Park. Are you here, mom? There's the mom, and is your dad here? Your dad? They're both here. Oh, the pressure is on, Dennis. Good luck.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Dennis Hahn, and I'm a sophomore at Ramsey High School. And I'd like to start off by thanking our special guest, Fort Lee Police Deputy Chief Patrick Hussain, Saddlebrook Chief Robert Kugler, Law Enforcement Against Drug Association Executive Director Nick Morrow, and previous detective of Bergen County Prosecutor Office Lawyer Jing Sun Kim, and all the parents for being here tonight. And I would also like to thank the board members of the USLEC for making this possible. And today I'll be discussing what are the measures and methods for crime prevention of drug, sex crime, terrorism, and cybercrime in the United States. And how students are involved in these crimes in the future, and how they'd be affected when entering the U.S. mainstream society. To begin with drugs, drugs are defined as a medicine or other substance which has physiological effect when ingested or otherwise introduced into the body. Typically in drug education, the negative side effect that is presented to deter students from using drugs is the direct health impacts that drugs can have. However, there is a much more dangerous aspect of drugs, and that is addiction. Now, addiction can cause a lot of problems. Addiction can cause fighting and violence inside and outside the home, money problems, trouble at school, trouble at work, losing a job, trouble in relationships, child abuse or neglect, driving crashes, arrests, and jail. Students who come from a background of drugs or family background of drugs or substance abuse typically have a very hard time adjusting to society. It influences their ability to perform in school. It typically ends up landing them in jail, and also have a hard time finding employment later on in life. Currently, the most popular methods to preventing drug use is communication, education, and enforcement. Communication and education is the process of informing students of the dangers of drug use and encouraging them to stay away from substance abuse. Methods of prevention is prevalent inside the classroom, but it also happens outside the classroom by utilizing tools such as public marketing and social media. The other method is enforcement, which is the process of creating laws around substance abuse and utilizing fines, detentions, and other penalties in order to deter students from using drugs. Although these methods are very effective, there are other methods that I believe can be utilized more to a full extent, such as community involvement and building a more positive community, and structure after-school activities for youth to steer them away and try to introduce them to more positive things other than drugs. Now, sex crimes are defined as criminal offenses of a sexual nature, and this can include sexual assault, sexual battery, prostitution, indecent exposure, and more. Sex crimes are not typically associated with teenagers. However, it does happen sometimes, and there can be impacts. Currently, there are over 200,000 people on the sex offender registry who were placed there for actions that they engaged in before the age of 18. The problem is that a sex crime is a broad term and can often involve benign sexual experimentation. And being placed on the sex offender registry means a massive loss of opportunity, whether the individual deserves it or not. And typically, when teenagers are arrested or put on the sex offender registry, it's not because of violent sex crime. Often you find that it's something that really doesn't hurt them or is kind of minor. So the problem is that sex crime is a very sensitive topic and is difficult to talk about openly in communities. So sex crime education is pretty minimal inside and outside the classroom, and it would be important moving forward to be able to educate students of what sex crimes are and how to avoid them. Now, cybercrime is defined as criminal activities carried out by means of the computer or the internet. Popular examples of cybercrime are identity theft, transaction fraud, hacking, and piracy. Now, because of the birth and the development of both the internet and personal computers is so recent, there are very few precedents on how to deal with cybercrime. And it's a more prevalent issue amongst teenagers because it is, part of the growing newer generation technology and whatnot. It's important moving forward to be able to educate students and both adults in the community about what cybercrimes are and how to deal with cybercrimes. Terrorism. Terrorism is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians in the pursuit of political aims. Aside from the direct damage that terrorism has on personal safety, acts of terrorism can cause fear, anxiety, and anger. And it can have dramatic impact on the mental health of students, inhibiting their performance in school and work and affecting their personal relationships. Now, of course, there is little that individual communities can do in the front of fighting terrorism. However, communities can build support structures and help students deal with the trauma. Now, crimes related to drugs, sex crimes, cybercrime, and terrorism all have drastic impacts on us in our communities and individually. And it's important that we understand how these crimes can affect us and how we can prevent them. And although progress has been made in preventing some of these crimes and preventative measures do exist, it is imperative that we recognize what further progress can be made. Thank you.
Great job, Dennis. Mom and Dad, you also did a great job. Any comments from the audience? This side? They're taking it easy on you, Dennis. They're taking it easy on you. But Dennis, let me tell you, every one of your topics, I can tell you, law enforcement, especially here in New Jersey, has come a long way. You know, every one of these topics is getting, law enforcement itself is getting more and more complex, but every one of these topics, more and more complex to investigate, to prosecute. Drugs, years ago, maybe before the students are born, the drug problem was the real addict that was addicted to street drugs and the needle in the arm, in the alley, the heroin, the buying of the drugs. Today's drug addict is like any one of us. We can have a sports injury, we could have a toothache, and we get prescribed pain medicine. And that pain medicine becomes addictive. Sometimes it gets addictive just like heroin. So not every face of a drug addict is the guy in the alley, the girl in the alley that's homeless and is doing, you know, needles sticking out of the arm. It's getting more and more complex. Legalization of marijuana is coming probably here to New Jersey, probably this year or next year. All right, so there's a lot of issues that come with drug prevention, drug education, and drug crimes. Sex crime, a lot of domestic violence, a lot of date rapes, a lot of things that people won't report. But law enforcement, I'm happy to say, has different expertise officers in different areas investigating each and every one of these complex issues. Cybercrime, we all know what that is, getting more and more complex, more and more with computer-driven activity. And terrorism, you never know what's going to happen there, right? Just like the homegrown terrorists that walked into that school in Florida not too long ago and just shot through the halls. So it doesn't have to be the terrorism from a faraway country, you know, block the borders, not them come. They're already here, they're amongst us. So all these topics, I can tell you that law enforcement is doing a great job, especially with the last one, terrorism. We're working with our partners, not only local, state, but federal and international partners to try and identify and do what's best to prevent each and every one of us to have, you know, a great chance at a life here, wherever that may be. So Dennis did a great job. Is there any other comments? Patrick? Yep.
They're taking the time to do such a good job. I'm going to take the time to have a few comments. I just want to share a story with you folks. The topics are all important. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of the cases we had this past week. We had a sex trafficking case. It was from another county. Fortunately, it didn't involve any of our children, but it did involve a 17-year-old child who was a runaway, and we caught them in a hotel here in Fort Lee. So sex trafficking is a huge problem, particularly with runaways. And again, this is about keeping children in school. The cyber crimes as well as cyber bullying, which you kids probably see a lot more of than we even know about because it affects teenagers. And it's something that's a serious problem which can lead to isolation, it can lead to suicide. There's all kinds of issues that come out of it. But I'm going to share a story with you about drugs. And I want you to remember this. And it's not a nice story, but I'm going to share it with you because whenever I hear kids talking about drug abuse, it goes back to the days I was a DARE officer for 16 years. So I had a lot of experience with teaching kids about how to stay off drugs. So there's a particular student when I first became an SRO who I won't say his name, but I was pretty fond of him. He was a likable kid. He didn't have a good family like many of you do. He was left with his grandparents to raise him and his brother. His older brother wound up committing burglaries and robberies and spent a lot of time inside and out of jail. But this particular kid was a very nice kid and an incredibly good baseball player and a handsome, good-looking kid, a nice kid. When I was an SRO, me and vice principal at the time, took a liking to this kid because we realized that a lot of the problems he had weren't necessarily self-created. It was in the environment that he grew up in, and maybe he didn't have enough positive people to influence his life. To the point where there were some teachers that didn't like him and wanted him to fail because he didn't do his work. And this vice principal, who was turned out to be a principal in another town for many years and just retired recently, he and I did everything in our power to get this kid to come to school, to the point where we literally drove in a police car to his grandmother's house and dragged him out of bed to go to school and to complete his work so he can go to his prom, which he did do, and he graduated. However, the following year, I was in the detective bureau, and I got a call that I had to go down and attend an autopsy. So I'm sure you kids all know what an autopsy is, right? It was this student. It was this student who I liked. I thought he had great potential. He was an incredibly athletic baseball player, and he overdosed on drugs after a night out in the city, and he came back to his grandmother's house with the other kid he was partying with, and he overdosed and died. So what I remember about the story, and what I want you to remember, is that I'll never forget what the mortician or the medical examiner said during the autopsy. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of what an autopsy is, but it's pretty rough. It's pretty rough. It's where they remove all parts of your body for testing, your brain, your heart, your kidneys, etc. It's really rough. We're talking about a 19-year-old kid who I just knew for 8 years, since he was 10 when I taught him in there. But I'll never forget what the medical examiner said. And it was just offhand, and for the police officers in the room, you know what an autopsy is. It's not a nice thing to do, but we have to do it. She was doing her measurements and tests, and I'll never forget, she said, "Oh, he has a big heart." And what she meant was, literally, he had a large heart. But I knew that he had a good heart. So it's something I'll never forget. He was a kid like you, like me, like everyone here. So drugs destroy people's lives. And like the chief said, it's not the TV-based junkie in an alleyway that's losing their lives. It's people, like the chief said, like you and I. It could be your friend, your relative, your girlfriend, your boyfriend. So it's important, one, that you abstain and stay away from drugs. I can't overemphasize that enough. It's an epidemic. There's a lot of people dying from it, and like the programs that Nick tomorrow and the chief are doing, I think it's important, and they need to hear stories from police officers because we deal with it. So congratulations to you. You did a great job, and you hit on a lot of very important. And I'm the counterterrorism coordinator for Fort Lee, so I have a couple graduate certificates in terrorism. So that's kind of a specialty of mine that I study, and we do have a lot of progress and success in preventing terrorism. So great job. Thank you.